Welcome back, guys. We're back with another 3 a.m. challenge. Today we're going to be doing an Animators Assembled Podcast at 3 a.m., guys. You know what that means?
Pain. That's what it means.
Actually, it's 9:30 Eastern Standard.
Actually, it's 8:28 Central Standard Time. Get it correct.
The TVA's like, yo,
Wow.
guys, you've literally done this podcast 11 times.
Well, I won't do it again.
Well, I never do it again.
All of our guests, after appearing on an episode, well, I'll never do that again.
Wow, guys. Set the reset charge. That was awful.
We've been limiting the release and recording of these podcast episodes to a much greater span of time. Speaking of the Time Variance Authority.
The Animators Assembled. We make podcasts sometimes.
We make
That's our
content,
slogan.
allegedly. But yeah, so welcome to yet another installment of the Animators Assembled Podcast. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spending your time with us.
Well, lucky for you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for blessing us with your wonderful presence.
Anytime.
Jaren, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do exactly?
My name is Merritt Movies, otherwise known as Merritt or Jaren. I am a stop motion creator.
You sometimes do a lot of editing work for other content creators.
Editor for my channel and some other people's channels. I also do 3D animation sometimes, very, very, very small times. I just do a lot of things and I just have fun doing them sometimes.
You're also a voice actor sometimes.
I do voice act to a degree. Sometimes. I say sometimes a lot, by the way. But more or less, essentially.
Choose your fighter sometimes versus it varies.
It just varies, you know. Gosh, flam it.
So you say you do stop motion sometimes, and then other times you don't stop motion, which means you do stop.
I stop motion.
There you
But
go.
yeah, so thank God for the power of editing, right? Unfortunately, that is the topic of this episode. We're focusing on making the cut versus what's left on the cutting room floor here. Obviously, this is the AA podcast for the AA Discord server. So check that out. There are links that you can go to depending on whatever platform you're listening to us through. Additionally, each of us have our own personal social media handles as well as different platforms where you can reach out to us independently. So if you want to hang out with all of us in the Discord server, or if you want to talk to any of us one-on-one, feel free to reach out if need be. So we'll dive into the nitty and the gritty with an opening thought real quick. Everything in filmmaking ultimately boils down to what ends up in the edit. What stays, what goes, and what gets brought in later. All of that stems from how one cuts together everything that's been recorded.
Right.
Camera angles, performance takes, music choices, and more. That all of these things can result in completely different final products. These choices can lead to you ending up with a Snyder Cut or a Justice League. Additionally, everyone has a bit of a different workflow depending on how they edit, so everyone has a unique process. Software they use, how they organize their media within that software, and the timelines, and how they budget their time with assembling the media into a watchable, cohesive package, typically a video in our case. All of these questions and more will be on the table as this episode tackles what may end up making the cut versus what remains left on the cutting room floor.
Whoa.
In previous episodes of the podcast, we've talked a lot about prep time in advance of the filming, how much or how little a project is planned prior to the filming process. Some people plan out the results of the edit and aspects in it, such as what music will be used ahead of time and the sequence of shots before they're shot, while others just let the script and shoot dictate how the edit will end up being. How much do you cater your script and shoot to what you want to edit? Or do you just hope for the best when the time comes? Whoever wants to take it first.
Jaren, the stage is yours.
Next question.
Okay, well, when it comes to...
I had to.
Jared, thank you. Oh my God, that was
great.
You are welcome.
Yes.
So, more or less, the way I handle things is kind of a tricky situation. For the majority of the time, I just end up writing the script. I never necessarily make a shot board, make an idea of like, oh, this is what I'm going to edit. This is what this edit is going to look like in the end. I mostly just write and let the script kind of flow and see what things end up. Basically, I don't do any kind of shot list or storyboards. When I film and just kind of let everything craft in my brain as to like what's going to happen, how am I going to frame this scene, yada, yada, yada. And sometimes when it comes to like using a stand, I sit there and go, am I possibly going to take this stand out? Should I insert some blank frames with that? And so I'd leave those frames in, and then I'd also export those and then remove those in post. Or if there's something that's a bit more effect heavy, like an explosion, for example, if I don't do a practical one, I would find something on, say, Footage Crate or somewhere else and go, okay, this is the explosion I'm going to use for this shot.
Sounds about right.
So you kind of, to safely sum up your answer using familiar terminology with the channel that we should totally merch, would you say the answer kind of... Would you say that it varies?
Yes, it varies. It varies quite a bit. But that's just because of the fact that I don't want to stick to like one style of filming. I want to do a bunch of different ideas. I want to kind of attempt it and try different things. I want to try different things when it comes to like my editing. Mostly my editing processes are kind of similar, but we'll go into that more later on. Would you say it's safe to say that you generally speaking, just like to kind of go with the flow of it and you just kind of focus a little bit more about each step, like one step at a time? Or do you think that it is a little bit more balanced between some projects where you very much focus on what you need ahead of time and then dive into it? It's a case-by-case situation. That's exactly right, yes.
Alrighty. Daniel, how about you?
I go back to the idea that I am a writer, director, content creator, and so that implies that I also edit and animate the entire thing. As a whole, you have a vision in mind, and it caters more so to the script as how you plan it out to be. You know exactly how it's going to go down, and since everything is written very detailed in the script, everything in the edit will also be included in the script. So I get very specific with what I want for the scene, and if it doesn't end up the way that I want it to, or if I think there's a better idea, then I'll test the waters out on that one. But I guess as far as I'm concerned, I work within an idea that I have and do my best to replicate what I have in my head. And we've already discussed how I don't really work with storyboards because, the script kind of forms its own world beyond what I can encapsulate with pen and paper in the time that I'm doing it. So you ride the wave and hopefully it'll end up exactly how you envisioned it to be,
or within striking distance, because you might not be able to perfectly execute your vision from the conception to the execution.
I mean, almost it's kind of it's very contrary to popular belief, but you could do a lot with editing. I'd like to see editors as magicians in their own craft because they can do all sorts of tricks that no one would expect and therefore create an outcome that would otherwise be hard to decipher. So that I really appreciate that about the ability to hide things, to show other things, and hopefully it'll all serve a constant script.
With your process, do you think that you plan a little bit more ahead and you kind of have your ducks in a row before you go into the shoot and the edit, or do you also kind of subscribe to the go with the flow sort of mentality?
Yeah, it's best to be completely planned. Like, again, this is something we've discussed in previous episodes, but it's very important to have everything all together before you start to deviate from that, because if you deviate without a plan, you'll just end up getting lost. So I think it's best to have an idea and hope that it turns out the way you want it to. And if it doesn't work, experiment, because different things will give you different results and it could benefit your project.
Good. So I'm starting to notice that although I think the I think is just a general disclaimer for the podcast is that it varies is a common answer, and each person's experience will be different. Your mileage may vary from any of ours. But from what I can tell here, even though both of you can say that sometimes it varies from project to project, Jaren seems to lean a little bit more towards I kind of like to just go one step at a time and really focus on each of those steps and kind of just go with the flow of it, while you like to kind of have the whole shebang already sort of figured out, and then you're basically just sprinkling that cohesive thing into each step. You kind of have everything from the jump, and then you tie into the other aspects of the process. So you know how it's going to be shot, so then you just focus on those shots. You know how it's going to be edited. You know what elements are needed, so then you just go and get those. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Am I right on what both of you said?
Yep.
You are right on the nail.
Because storytelling is very much a rhythm, and you have your own rhythm to follow individually per creator. So depending on how you saw it initially when writing the script or when planning something is going to be completely different to how another person's process is. So as they go with the flow and trust their own process, you're confident that it's going to be great. It's not going to falter because, the auteur behind it is very much into what they want to accomplish if they are in fact passionate about making it. And I think it's pretty great that we can all have our own different processes due to the fact that we're very original, unique creators. And yeah, people get to appreciate that.
We all bring something unique to the table. And I think it's interesting that both of you are kind of on opposite sides of the same coin. I'm just stuck in the perpetual loop and flip between both of you when it comes to my answer, because there are certain projects that I plan down to the letter with I want to use this music. I want to use these shots. This is the exact choreography I want. These are the characters. These are the voice actors I want. This is exactly how it's going to look. And then there are other times where I'm a lot more loose and open to endless possibilities and brainstorming and kind of just really going out of my depth of having a consistent single tunnel vision, I'd say. And when it comes to the edit itself, I like to do previs. I love to do storyboarding. I love to do shot lists. Well, within reason. I prefer storyboarding more than shot listing, but I love the idea of having certain images, certain frames, paintings that I want to capture in the filmmaking process. There are certain sequences that I kind of think about that I want to come to pass. I want people to see it the way I'm visualizing it in my mind. So it's like I could pull different examples, like the Batsy v. Danvers trailer. I saw the Gangster's Paradise music used in the Sonic trailer, and I thought of like the that moment. I thought it would be really cool if I could time certain beats of fight choreography in that trailer to those moments in the Sonic Gangster's Paradise audio. But I also was able to throw in like the Civil War, like at the very end of it, with some thunder in the middle. And then there are other times where I just literally go with the flow of what I'm feeling in the fight scene. I might have notes in the script, but I kind of go freeform with it based on what I'm looking at. I think a little bit with Nomad, there was a certain level of experimentation. I had some fight moves written in that script, but I also took major creative liberties once I had the figures and the set all set up. And I kind of was just like, all right, well, what if I have the camera move this way? What if I have this character do this to this character using this furniture? So like a couple of ideas would come earlier on, but then there's also a little bit of spontaneity, a little bit of just spur of the moment inspiration. So I think even in the edit process, I like to think ahead as to some moments that I want in the edit. There are certain like pillars, like required boxes on my checklist that I want to fulfill. But then sometimes I also want to be a little bit loose with it. I want to be a little bit free. I don't want to stifle myself with having very certain, set, limited expectations and not be able to match what I'm capable of making to those expectations. Sometimes a shot won't turn out the way you envision it. Sometimes it might turn out differently. It might be even better than what you thought of at the jump. So I think that for me, at least, there's a little bit of a healthy balance between having everything planned out and kind of throwing away the plan in terms of thinking ahead to the edit part. And it also depends on the project. Some projects I like to subscribe to one particular approach or practice. And then other projects I'm the opposite. And then there's some that are in the middle. So, I mean, moral of the story, cut the check, because I'm about to say it varies. So, yeah. Good answers, y'all.
Thanks, I tried.
Any other thoughts, comments, spin-off questions while we're at it?
I'm game to continue. How about you, Jared?
I think I've gotten the gist of of the answers within that topic all down.
Okay, next question. When it comes to the editing, everyone has a different order of operations. Some people edit each scene individually right after they film and then export it. And then others wait till all of the filming wraps before assembling it all together at once. Which works best for your personal particular edit process and why?
Damn, I was getting an Instagram thing ready. Let me read that. Let me do a recap. Let me read that too. When it comes to the editing, everyone has a different order of operations. Some edit scenes individually right after they film. Others wait till all of filming wraps before assembling it all at once. What works best for your edit process? Jaren, how about you go first? Oh, thanks, me. Why not? All right. So, anyways, when it comes to edit, God, flame it. Damn. All right. So,
pretty good host.
For me,
are you replacing Ellen?
Yes, I'm actually the new
I mean, it
Jared
does
Gordon.
kind of sound
Jaren.
similar. Ellen,
Not
Jaren,
really.
The Merritt Movies show.
The Merritt Movies show.
the Merritt Streamies.
It's a movie and a show. The Merritt Movies show.
It's an experience. That's what it is.
It's a show.
It's a hoot and a half.
Show.
All right. But anyways,
It's a me
Great
mo.
question. It's a great question. It's a really great question, Jared.
there's a lot of ways that I can edit things overall, but most of the time I wait until I get all of filming completed before I decide to assemble. Mostly because sometimes I film out of order, and filming out of order it just is sometimes easier for me. So that way I could just like get multiple scenes within the same setting done and taken care of. There's some times where it comes to a scene where I'm like, yeah, I think I'm going to get this scene edited first and then just leave it on the timeline until I get everything else done. But that's usually like with blank frames. I like getting blank frames done and out of the way before I do anything else. At least that's what I haven't started doing blank frames until sometime earlier this year. And it's been kind of beneficial. And just getting that stuff out of the way just makes the editing process so much easier in the long run when you just try to get everything else taken care of.
Perfecto.
All right, Daniel, how about you?
On the off chance that I'm working on a shorter project, I'd probably, or at least I used to, complete the entire filming process first and then start editing. But now I've found that your ideas are more so like your energy towards editing something changes as you go along. So if I'm shooting, say, a scene from 1 to 5, I'd shoot scene 1 first, edit that, and make sure that it's exactly how I envisioned it and see if I need to change anything so that I can kind of base it off of how it's paced in the edit, how it feels, the vibe of the entire thing, and if this is the right track to go on or if I need to rewrite anything in the script, because it all hinges on how it turns out as the final product. And I think it's important to think about what circumstances you're in. Like a year ago, I was not home and I was not in a position to film much. So I tried to essentially, what's the word I'm looking for? Like stockpile footage I can edit on the road so that I would have scenes ready as soon as I got back and was ready to continue filming again. There are different cases, especially with the life that I have, traveling a lot and having to be out of space where I can work on some projects. So it's also a case of the varies, but I try my best to complete something as soon as I can, and if I have everything on hand, I'll do that. And other times it works really, really well when when you're trying to find a gray area for the tone and theme of your project.
So if I'm getting this straight, Jaren is of the mindset of waiting till everything's filmed before beginning post-production, while you're of the mindset of work on things as you go. So once you're done filming a scene, you start editing it, and then you try to basically finish it before you kind of really move on to the next scene, so you can kind of preserve the vision that you had from scene to scene. See, it's really funny to me, and I'm wondering if there's going to be a recurring pattern here. But I'm literally in the middle of both of those answers as well. It varies, but I mean, generally speaking, I love to dabble in a little bit of both. Again, I'm a big fan of previs, and I love doing mock edits and tests. I love doing little test footage sequences, shooting previs, storyboarding, all of that kind of stuff really gets me jazzed about what I'm working on. And the same thing goes with when I film a scene and try to edit aspects of it. I might not edit the full complete scene, but I might edit a very rough cut without any effects or anything like that. Just so I can preserve the vision of the scene that I had without really diving into it cold turkey. So it's like I can still continue the filmmaking process while also working on some of the editing on the side. So I kind of have a bit of maintaining the consistency from a scene shoot to a scene's edit, while also not losing progress on the rest of the shoot and the rest of the edit. So I don't slow down typically, even though I've slowed down quite a bit in terms of output lately. But yeah, so sometimes I lean more towards I'll just film everything and then edit everything. And then sometimes I'm a lot more like one step at a time, really edit each individual thing to perfection and then just compile it together. In my earlier days, I would literally film a scene and edit a scene, just like how Daniel does. And more recently, I've gone more of Jaren's approach of just film the entire thing and then edit. So it kind of depends. I do like breaking down my edit because it makes it a little less intimidating. It's also easier on a laptop computer in terms of storage, in terms of not overheating it, in terms of less software crashing. Having that bit of a breakdown really does help, at least in my mind, because it kind of keeps me focused on a much shorter end goal so I can really focus on the nitty and gritty of the details. So, yeah, I mean, it all kind of depends, but there's a lot to love with either approach, and I would strongly recommend you try them both and see if you kind of prefer one over the other, or if you just like to keep mixing it up like I do.
Hell, maybe you're ambidextrous and you can film and edit at the same time.
Use your feet to film and your your eyelashes to edit.
Yeah, and your hands are just obviously not being used in that instance. I mean, Maybe I was wrong about that answer, because the last thing I edited was Under the Dark, and Under the Dark was very much a traveling situation where I had to film some stuff before I left and then edit while on my trip and then get back once everything was completed. And like that was a whole nother it was an adventure. So that entire process is very it's very mute as far as, that linear progression of things.
Unfortunately for you, you're in a situation where, I mean, when it comes to editing, you don't have to have the exact same process with every single thing you do. And typically you should try to change things up between each project a little bit. You don't have to stick with the same routine each time. And it's not like anyone's going to penalize you for straying away from your usual order of
not
operations.
Even that, I'd say, but it's more so the idea that what if your situation calls for a different form of editing? You can't exactly say that your editing software will work when you want it to work, or your camera is going to work when you want it to work, or you're going on a trip and your schedule is going to be exactly, it would cater to what your filming plans are. So it's a coin toss. It's a roll of the dice, but it's all, yeah, again, it's a case of the varies, because life fucks you in the ass sometimes.
I guess it's a good piece of advice for all potential creatives. Prepare to adapt and overcome, because there's a lot of trial and error in this process, and you're bound to go through some problems. You're bound to hit some trouble spots, and you kind of just have to work your way through them or around them. And sometimes getting from point A to point B might not be as easy as you initially thought. So it's always good to keep an open mind about what the process might yield for you, depending on whatever project you are working on.
No project is perfect. Every time you get something finished with an edit, if you think it's the perfect thing ever, you will find something that you might want to work on down the line. And
you might look at it here and now saying, oh, this is perfect, it can't be better. And then you look back on it later, it's like, oh, well, I could have done this or I could have done that. It's the hindsight bias.
Definitely the hindsight bias with that.
So, again, this is a growing, ever-changing, ever-evolving learning form. And you just kind of got to roll with it a little bit.
The whole process relies on what you film, too. Are you continuing a scene where you have to reshoot, or is it just a continuation of, like, a reverse shot of the scene that you filmed the day before? Or is it a completely different scene entirely? Because you also got to take those into consideration when, notes on what color grading you fix in the edit in order to correct what distortion there might have been from day 1 to day 2. I found myself doing that a lot for episode 1 of Under the Dark. Like I had to reshoot a scene the next day, or not reshoot, but pick up where I left off. And it turns out that the lighting situations were changed. So I had to take notes of that. So a key tip, but a little side tip, but a really important one. Take notes. Take notes as you go along. Write it down. What do you need to fix in the edit, and what do you need to fix while filming? Because it's a mixed bag, and you could really use the extra foresight.
I have one other question that's kind of relevant to this that isn't on the outline. It shouldn't take too terribly long, but it's another thing that kind of
I'm joking.
Popped up in my head.
How dare you? This has been 20 minutes and you want to deviate?
Who would deviate from the outline? I mean, what?
Get wrecked. Anyway.
So this is kind of a similar question in a sense, regardless of whether or not you edit during the shooting process or afterward. Do you still like to independently edit your scenes and export them and then condense your timeline? Or do you like to just work with the entirety of the project in one editing file?
I used to do that, actually. Funny enough, I used to export a lot of the scenes on their own, just for space purposes, just to make things easier when it comes to organizing an over 40 scene edit overall. It just kind of, but lately I've been just putting everything into a timeline, albeit that's not the most recommended idea. Honestly, I'd rather suggest do scenes, but scene by scene. But for me, I just feel more comfortable throwing everything into one giant timeline and putting everything there and just organizing it that way, more so than just, exporting scene by scene now, because it just seems easier to me to just go back and have everything already there in my bins and everything else.
Daniel, how about you?
Sorry, Jaren, continue your point.
Oh, never mind. Continue. My bad.
This is also really, Jaren, this is a hilarious instance, because I have several files depending on the scene. So if it's, like I said earlier, scene 1 to 5, I would have an edit for scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, and scene 4 before I get to the 5th one, which would be the entirety of it. So I'd have separate edits to do each individual scene, and then one edit where I could do a compilation of all and add additional, post-production whatevers that I need in order to complete it. But as far as the base scenes are concerned, I break it down and tend to condense them as best as I can, so I have more of a hold of what's going on with one scene. I don't want to have to Control A or Command A, depending on what you're working on, and shift the entire project only for your entire computer to crash, or the whole project to just completely erupt because it's not meant to be lined up that way. I like to take things step by step so that I know that one scene is locked and then the next scene is locked. So when I stitch it all together, it would be perfect in a sense. It's not going to be disrupted by anything else in the workflow.
Yeah, I love how you two are consistently in opposition, polar opposites here.
Fight me, I'm joking.
Yin yang.
And I like how I'm just in the middle of the
Yeah,
both
you're the
because I
referee.
do both.
You're the moderator of this fight.
Although funny enough, there are times where I end up exporting some scenes with just the dialogue, and then I make it separate file for sound effects and just sound design or music design.
Yeah, that's
Well,
a whole
again,
nother.
So more now that I think about it, I'm on the same coin as Daniel this time around, kind of with that, because there are times where I do that, though it's just not often that I do anymore.
So you would say you're a little bit of both. And Daniel, you also said you do a little bit of both.
It kind of, but I ran through the issue with the Black Ant, I remember, where the entire thing would just stop working and I can't watch the video playback because there are way too many things on the timeline. So it would be much better to do things individually now, especially with the circumstances where I have so many elements put in, be it sound effects or music or dialogue or mouth animations. There's so many moving pieces that I can't afford to have 1,000 elements just for 2 scenes when I have another scene to work on to complete and perfect. So that's a whole nother edit. I have an edit for the sound design. Thank you for bringing that up, Jaron. I have an edit for the sound design, the music, and actually, no, the music is in the final edit. I do that with the credits and the complete edit has the credits and the music. The priority edit that I do for the scene has the sound effects and visual effects as well as the mouth animation. So it's very baseline stuff for the original edit. So I have a lot.
I'm going to say that, like Jaron, it still kind of does seem that you lean towards doing it all in the same project file, even though you also tend to also export individual scenes and
Damn it,
individual
Michael, we were on the same
properties too.
side.
But it was a lie. And Daniel, you seem to be more of the like individual approach because you've tried to do the bigger edit. So you kind of both have done both things. So it really does truly vary. We're a lot more neutral on this one than we were on some of the other ones.
All of my editors in the comments, let me know if you also do the final edit or final edit or final
edit Mark II.
Yeah, exactly. Let me know if you do that.
Final official version.
Yeah, be it project files or the final render. We all do that. Don't lie.
Yeah, we do.
Say yes or you're wrong.
Yeah, we do.
That's something we all could agree on. For me, again, I also have done the big full edits with every single little element sprinkled through. And I've also edited individual scenes with all the elements sprinkled in and then exported each scene and then just simply compiled those scenes together into one timeline. So it's like I took care of all of the main editing first, export it, and then just collapsed it into the like a final assembly cut. It really depends on the project that I'm working on. With live action assets, it's a lot harder to mix in a bunch of different elements for me because recording live action footage is actually more storage consuming than stop motion animation and photographs, ironically enough, depending on the resolution and depending on the frame rate and all that kind of stuff. There's a whole bunch of additional factors that coincide with it. When it comes to stop motion too, I mean, I also really enjoy having the individual scene exports if I just want to go back and rewatch one particular scene. So sometimes I might have everything in one big timeline, but I might export certain like pieces of that timeline. Sometimes I might copy the elements of a particular scene and open a new project file just so it's also in a separated place. So sometimes I edit a scene individually, and then I copy all the elements within that timeline and I paste them into a new project file with all of the other scenes and their elements from the individual project edits, and all of that data is in one big edit. So it really kind of just fluctuates. It depends on what I'm working on, how I'm feeling, how involved the project is, how much time I've already spent on it, if I've had any issues with it glitching or crashing. For general users and for people who don't have expensive gear when it comes to editing, I would personally recommend editing scenes individually, independently, over editing everything in one big project file, because it's definitely going to risk your storage capacity and the quality over time, especially making yourself more prone to crashing if you have all of those elements in one big project edit. So if you break it down, that's a lot less variables for your technology to have to process, and it might make it easier for you to get all of the editing done, even though you're spacing it out and you're kind of taking more time to do each thing independently. If you have technology that's limited in the storage, in the power capacity, it might be worthwhile to edit independently first.
Here's a fun side question. Do you guys, and this is for you individually, do you guys have tidy timelines or do you have messy timelines? Like, do you name
Jaren, you
each
first.
individual layer?
Mine's kind of messy. If you look at it from a distance, it looks nice. It looks very nice and clean. But if you expand that timeline open, you will see a piece of dialogue, and then like seconds later, you on that same layer, you'd see a sound effect or some kind of cue, or you'd see like two sound effects like overlapping or just like immediately like clashing with one another. Up close, it looks gross. From a distance, it somehow looks fine.
Put that on a shirt.
But I tend to do a lot of layers when it comes to that.
That's a really good question. And Daniel, I want you to go next because I think you two actually agree on the messy timeline here.
Actually,
I think you guys are on the exact... No, when you edit the podcast, it's a mess.
We're talking about editing stop motion. This is an Animators Assembled podcast, not an Animators Assembled podcast how-to. I edit my stop motions with several layers that are named, and it's relatively tidy, specifically for what it's supposed to do. Any more than that, I can't handle the mess. I used to have it used to be like a really messy station, but I learned my lesson because when it comes to having to look for that sound effect to either replace it or change it or move it so that it's timed better, I think it benefits, the project benefits from you having control of where it sits, or be it a text or audio. I think it's just important to know where those elements lie on a timeline.
Okay. I'm going to say that obviously, again, depending on the project, depending on how difficult it is and what exactly I'm working with, it could change. It can be completely different. No two timelines will ever look alike. But as a general rule of thumb, I like to keep my timelines as organized as possible. So when it comes to the visual layers, I like to keep footage layers like bare bones stop motion separate from the chroma key background layers, separate from the visual effects layers, separate from any titles or graphic layers like that. From the audio side, I like to keep the voice acting and dialogue lines on separate layers from sound effects. And there might be multiple layers kind of caked together. Like there might be multiple sound effects that have to be layered, but I still like to have the dialogue, the sound effects all within the same spot, and then music underneath that. If there's any other audio related stuff that's needed, then it's thrown in accordingly based on those layers. I kind of try to keep things as organized as possible. Sometimes these layers can get even more expanded. Sometimes I have dedicated layers to dedicated performers. So, okay, I'm working with this person's audio and say their mic was a little bit on the quieter side. I might just raise the audio across that entire layer for that one particular performer, and vice versa. If one performer has something that's too loud, I might have them on a individual layer. So that way their audio can be adjusted accordingly without having to interfere with anyone else's in the same spot. It's also a good thing to acknowledge the fact that we are all talking about NLEs or nonlinear editors. So this is like your Adobe Premiere Pro, your DaVinci Resolve, your After Effects, your HitFilm Express, your Camtasia, Magic's Movie Edit, Final Cut. There's a bunch of different editing softwares where you have these stacked elements on top of each other in the timeline. And then you have editors that are more or less called storyboard editors, which are your movie makers and your iMovies, where you have a lot less layers because you only have like one layer dedicated to all video footage, or maybe one or two, but it's a little less clean. It's a little bit blockier. And it's like you kind of tie different elements to certain things within it. So like sometimes, at least from my experience with editing on iMovie, you'd have to tie text to a video clip, or you have to tie an effect to a particular video clip rather than having a separate layer for those kinds of elements. So when we're talking about editing and timelines and all that stuff, we're referring to the more heavy hitter type of video editing software, and not so much the cheaper and sort of easier to use right off the bat type software. So sorry for that little side note tangent, but I thought that was worth explaining to people who might not know all that goes into video editing the way that we do. So yeah, excellent question, Daniel. That was fantastic.
That was a very good question. Yes.
There are a lot of elements to juggle when working in editing. You have camera angles, footage, performances, such as like voice work in stop motion or live action portrayals in live action media. You have music, sound effects, visual effects, graphics. Sometimes you might have like 3D animated elements and assets. And there are a whole bunch of other aspects that can make up a final video. If you are able to pick any one of these elements, which is your favorite and which is your least favorite to work with and why? Jaren, would you like to start us off?
I think one of my favorite aspects to do is visual effects as a whole, because there's just some great things you can come up with. You could grade your works to look phenomenal in post. You can also just find so many good effects that to help enhance the thing if you're not very good at practical animations for, like, say, a gunshot, or, like I mentioned earlier, an explosion. You can't have some action figure magically falling down 50 feet in the air. So green screen it, you toss it into the editing software, and bada bing, bada boom. You have your green screen. I'm kind of going on a tangent there when it comes to that, but more or less, it's just really fun when it comes to just figuring out what kind of visual effects could work to help enhance this scene. Granted, there are times where I feel like I struggle with it because it's always hard for me to just see, oh, I'm not sure what gunshot I'm going to use for this. Oh, I'm not entirely sure what kind of effect I'm going to use to get a nice smoky element. Do I get a stock one and just reuse that same stock over and over? Or do I somehow manage to try to use the in effects for, say, like After Effects or Hit Film with some of their assets to make custom smoke? It's just very kind of interesting to me with that. But if I had to choose least favorite, I'd have to say performances. Just voice work overall when it comes to stop motion.
Yours or someone else's?
Just working with it in general. There's times where I feel
saved.
Like I'm just not sure how I'm able to cut these to where it sounds like natural acting with one another. But I always do my best to make sure it sounds natural and doesn't seem like there's way too long of a pause when it comes to some guy saying like, oh, hey, I'm saying this. And then I say something rather than being like, oh, hey, I'm saying this. And then I say this. It's really tricky, and sometimes it just bugs me when I get a scene wrapped and I just play it back and I just hear everything just very awkward with one another. And I'm like, man. And there's times after I've already posted the video where it seems just like that. And you also got to worry about all the performance work going way too fast as well, because.
And are you the kind of editor who, when you hear something like that, go back to the voice actors and ask them to redo it, or do you just bite the bullet and deal with what you got?
For the most part, I tend to bite the bullet and just see how it feels overall after doing a couple test runs. But if it really boils down to it, I would message the voice actor and ask for an additional take here and there when it comes to the performance they gave. Mostly because listening and just hearing all the characters and the recordings with all the voice actors do, and all now within the aesthetic of the scene, I could give an idea and give a better explanation as to like what they should do,
right? How
they should emote that better, yada yada yada.
Yeah, it's the job of a writer, director, animator, editor to do something like that.
It's very tricky when you do that overall, but in the long run, if you can manage to balance all of them well, you can make some really good stuff. Whether you're a starter, senior, at animating, etc. It's kind of crazy and just kind of cool just to see what people can make out there.
Yeah.
Daniel, your move.
So my favorite part of the process is editing. That's my favorite part of editing. And my least favorite part of the process is editing. I despise editing. No, I'm joking.
I agree.
That's groundbreaking.
Yeah, I know,
That's
right?
cinema. Like,
everybody, hands up if you relate. Like, comment, share, and subscribe if you relate.
Please share.
So I really like the 180 degree rule. I get a lot of crap for breaking it and working within those parameters, but I literally have a strip of tape that I tape to my computer if I don't have a digital ruler to put on my screen, just to see that the eye lines match up. So if you measure the scene where Joker's talking to Harleen Quinzel, be it a wide shot or a single or a double, if you can see their shot reverse shot and you measure their eye lines, they're actually pretty well matched, because I was really anal retentive about that. But I wouldn't say that's my favorite part I'm more so leaning towards the sound effects. I am a sound design junkie. So when it comes to really good sound design, I'm just like, I'm full speed ahead. I love it. I work as hard as I can to make sure it sounds great, sounds realistic. Usually I'm very Michael Mann in Heat, where if a gunshot doesn't sound as real as it's supposed to, I'll go back and find something more accurate. Fight sound effects are really hard to come by. So when you get that really great sound of someone getting hit, you have a hit. And I really love how that works. And the swooshing and swashing, the explosions, the footsteps, the whole shebang. And I'm a really big fan of that process. My least favorite part, and I already mentioned it earlier, screw mouth animations, because you got to do it.
That's an ish you, not an ish anybody else.
That's fair. But then again, the question was raised. So mouth animations suck. I'm not really a fan of doing it, even though it does pay off. I think it pays off. You got to do it frame by frame. You got to match the inflection of the voice actor saying it. And it doesn't, like, sometimes it doesn't even work in your favor because, it either doesn't match up well. You got to go back and fix it, or you change the script later on and decide that it's not actually being used, or so many elements that lead up to the mouth animations just being an even worse pain than it was. Generally speaking, if we were to talk about stuff that isn't an issue for anyone else, or rather is an issue for everyone else and not just me, finding good visual effects can be really tough. Like, you either make it from scratch, or you try to find something that other people probably have already used in their videos. So I tend to look for stock green screen elements or visual effects elements that haven't been used by other people, or at least have been less so. And to cheat my way out of that, I flip it 180 degrees. So if something's facing left, I'll face it right, like a cloud of fog or smoke, and try to hide any sign of reuse anywhere else. Same goes for sound effects. If I know that someone's already used it before in the past, I'll try my best to make sure that keep it refreshing and make sure that it feels new to the people watching it. Because for me anyway, it takes me out of the experience if I'm watching a visual effect that I've seen used before, only in a different angle or a different color or fashion. And it takes me out of it because I know I've seen it before, and it's like the Wilhelm scream almost. So I gotta make sure it's not only unique, but original even, and it's used in a completely different context. So yeah, something like pouring gasoline could be a fountain of water, but it's just in a different color, and it's very differently animated to your purpose of usage.
So for me, my answer kind of depends on what exactly I'm editing. So for certain, it kind of depends on if I'm working on like a live action short film of some kind versus stop motion versus maybe like a stage performance that I'm filming and editing. It really kind of depends on those things. I think one that's consistent across the board, like, I also kind of think that there's a bit of a love-hate between every single thing. I love every single part of the editing process and also absolutely loathe it at the same time. So Daniel was not far off. For me, I kind of agreed with Jaren's sentiments on trying to match up different performances and different, not only that, but just different voice actor recording sessions and their way of going about recording. Some people give you way more takes with a lot of variety. Some people might only give you a couple that they feel is the definitive take for their performance. So you kind of have to work within those parameters. In live action, sometimes there might be something you really like from one take, one shot, but then there's something you don't like, and then you look to another shot to see which one has more of what you're looking for rather than more of what you're not looking for, and you kind of have to pick a lesser of the two evils. So I think between live action and stop motion, I think finding the right takes can be both something that I love and something that I hate. In terms of something that I always love to do, I love when I'm able to combine different music with camera cutting. I love when I'm able to kind of like time certain in-camera actions to the beat of soundtracks, to the sound effects. Like I love when I have a certain song or certain instrumental percussion of some kind in mind. I love when I'm able to sort of complement that with the visuals that are being presented on screen. So that's always something that I love across the board, whether it's live action or stop motion or on stage. If I can time whatever's on screen with whatever's in your ears, that always gets me hype when I'm in an edit. And it actually can, if it really does work out the way I envision it, or if I test it out and it turns out better than I thought, it can really increase my satisfaction and my excitement for what I'm working on. Something I will always hate as a least favorite, it's trying to do compositing and visual effects work and heavy duty effects finding and seeking. Because it's so difficult to find good effects. And it's even harder to do visual effects and audio effects. I think I have a bit of a knack for doing sound effects when I have the time, when I have the right materials. I love recording my own sound effects too. But with visual effects, it's so hard to find what you're looking for. And it's so hard to execute a shot that you have on chroma key backdrop with whatever's out there in the world. I love shooting with practical set pieces because everything is right there in front of you and you know exactly what you're working with. Unless if you know all of the assets and elements you're working with when you're shooting on chroma key from the start, it's a lot harder to shoot one of those scenes and then have to figure out, all right, how can I use what I've shot with whatever assets are out there? And it's also really difficult. There's a lot of trial and error. You have to do a lot of cleanup. You have to do a lot of adjustment, tweaking, and it can get very frustrating. It can make your technology prone to a lot of crashes, a lot of glitches. You might have artifacts in there that you don't want at all. Random things that pop up, like a random glitch or something that really kills your motivation to keep working on it after you've worked so hard and you export it and you watch it back only to see that something wrong happened with it. It could be a complete buzzkill on a project for me. Any other thoughts or comments on this topic while we're on it?
You guys both touched on the voice acting element, and I feel like a bum to not have my I will give my 2 cents. No one asked for it. But I think, performances are pretty important. And I mentioned it earlier. It's really crucial to have a hold of not just the filming aspect or the editing aspect, but you want to have everything done in the pre-production phases first, in the script writing, so that it's all detailed and you give directions in the script so that it doesn't get distorted by a lack of communication with what the material that you give your performers. And I think that's really important too, because if they don't have anything to work with, they'll make it up in their head. And there's nothing wrong with improvising, because they are also, they're creating their own characters too, and they have their own idea of what they want to make. But you don't want to necessarily compromise because you weren't able to communicate it properly. And I think it's important that you trust your voice actors to do the best that they can with what you give them.
Are we ready for the next question?
I'd say we are. What about you, Jaron?
I think so as well.
Okie dokie. So, there are a bunch of editing programs on the market for creators to take advantage of now more than ever. What do you look for in an editing program, and which programs would you recommend the most for meeting your needs?
I usually look for an editing program that can necessarily do all the basic needs and then some. I know the software can do it, therefore I'm going to film to the specifications of knowing I can do that with the editing software I have. So like, for example, if I want to do green screen, I want to make sure I look for a software that can have green screen elements within it. The past few years, I have been using HitFilm and much recently, like the past year, Adobe for Premiere and After Effects. And they both have been very beneficial with a bunch of the effects they have, the recommendations, and just all the other stuff that they have out there. And there's a bunch of tutorials on YouTube on things like Skillshare, whatever, that you can basically find and figure out how to make what you want to do a reality in the post-production process. You should work with what you got essentially overall. I started off with Windows Movie Maker back when I first started stop motion
Pioneer.
animation. Yes, I am very much a pioneer. And I had to work with one timeline, and I had to export it many times so that I can get dialogue in, sound effects in, and then music in, and then possibly another one just in case there was more I had to do. But now I'm grateful that there's better options out there for people like DaVinci. I don't use DaVinci, but that's a good example. And just put layers up, and well, you can just get your stuff done better now, especially with just all the opportunities out. There's also great phone apps from what I've heard. I don't use my phone to edit anymore, but I don't think I've ever used it period to edit. But it's just crazy that there's just so many softwares that people can just do. But Adobe and HitFilm have met my needs the most in the end with this question.
The Moviola isn't necessarily comprehensive, so I would not recommend. I do like Jaren said, you only have one purpose, and that's to stitch together a bunch of things and hope for the best to create the project that you're trying to make, be it iMovie or something that you have to pay for. Well, I think some people have to pay for iMovie. I might be stupid. But you just got to get the job done. It doesn't matter how you do it. Camtasia, we talked about it in a duo episode. Camtasia is not meant for heavy duty film editing workloads, but that's what I use all the time. Heck, that's what I use to edit the podcast. It's meant to be a more of a presentation business type layout software than it is for narrative productions. So if it works, right? It doesn't have to be anything special. Although you can go the extra mile to use something like DaVinci or After Effects or Premiere to make something work if it calls for it, because those offer a bunch of other features that, you know, your standard editing software might not. But yeah, if your vision is being communicated through the means that you have, and I joked about the Moviola, but that's how they used to work way back when, and it was effective for them, and they put out some really good stuff. It shouldn't really change the vision in the end. So maybe if I were to like touch on something else that is a bit of a bother, and I'm not, you know, throwing shade at anybody, I'm not too big on watermarks. So I don't work on, I haven't worked on, nor will I want to work on a program with watermarks. That doesn't mean your content will be any less sophisticated or any less special, but that's just a personal preference on my end. I don't deal in watermarks.
I'm kind of with Jaren on what he expects from an editing program. For me, I look at versatility and flexibility. I look for something that can meet any of my current existing needs, as well as potential needs that I might not have right now, but I might need later on. I settled on HitFilm when I initially came back to the stop motion world. I really liked HitFilm, and I used that as my daily driver video editor for a long span of time. It was very good for my live action and my stop motion filmmaking needs, and I still go back and revisit it. Things that you can do with like how you go about executing this particular process is a little bit more straightforward with it than, say, another editing software. Although more recently, I've actually switched to DaVinci Resolve for most of my main daily driver needs, because DaVinci Resolve had some of the functions and features that HitFilm did not, especially in terms of like audio fixing. So because HitFilm no longer met the needs that I had at the time, I needed to migrate to another video editing software that had more of those needs. And both HitFilm, I should mention, HitFilm and DaVinci Resolve both have free versions that you can easily get. It's very easy to download them. They're not very easy to learn, but there's a bunch of tutorials on YouTube from a bunch of different creators that can show you the ropes. So, I mean, there's a bunch of different things that you can get out of different software. There's a bunch of different programs that are out there. But for me, I look for versatility and flexibility, and also affordability too, because I'm not made of money and most creators aren't. My personal recommends would be DaVinci Resolve and HitFilm. Although, bit of a warning, HitFilm is a compositor, so there's a lot of extra baggage and bulk, and export times can be very long, and it doesn't always have the best audio functions. And DaVinci Resolve relies on a new form of video editing that we actually haven't talked about called Node, editing. It's kind of like a flow chart in a sense, and you just connect different elements together. Sometimes you do have timeline and storyboard editing options, but a lot of things also can and need to be done through nodes. So it is another thing you kind of just have to work around if you do utilize that. You just got to hope that the pros outweigh the cons, and you just have to find what works best for your workflow. Okay, we have one more question left. So last but not least, editing is a collaborative thing. Even if you're working solo, you still rely on others to make things work. I spelled it wrong in the outline, so that's kind of funny. Sometimes you may be an editor tasked with carrying out the vision of another creator. Jaren, in your personal and professional experience, you've actually been the main editor of other people's stop motion animation. So what's the best and worst part about working with others in the editing process?
I think the best part is just getting to help make their ideas a reality when it comes to making a stop motion for them. Not necessarily recording for them, but just editing, because, you know, this isn't a filming episode. This is an editing episode. But yeah, it's just fun doing that and just fun collaborating, just always seeing what they like, what they want you to get feedback on, etc. Just so that way you make it to the best of their ability. Like, for example, me and Unraveled worked together on a couple of Marvel projects over the past couple of years. We worked on 2 series, actually. Where I picked up the editing process for the finale of his Avengers Infinity War project, and then I was the main editor for the entirety of his Avengers Endgame series. It was a fun time. However, you're both trying to like explain things properly and trying to explain how and understand one another with how it's supposed to be shown during the edit or during the cut. But you just end up accidentally kind of just stressing and saying, you know what, let's call it for a day. And then usually the next day we'd just be fine. We'd be fine getting it figured out. But that'd be usually for like a special effects thing. It would not be for like the project overall. I think it's fun working with other creators. I also work with MK Former Win on a couple of his projects. We also have some ideas.
The director of Crash.
Oh my God.
Our previous podcast guest.
Oh, really?
Yeah, check it out, guys.
Wow.
But yeah, we worked on a Christmas special together last year, and that was really fun. I worked on a lot of the sound effect design, and he was able to easily give me ideas and just feedback on, oh, hey, lower the volume on these. Hey, do this, because we were on a time crunch. We were on a severe time crunch. We missed our delivery thing, but we were still trying to get it out by the end of the year overall, nonetheless. Luckily, we were able to, but it's just one of those things where you're just like, you got to work really fast and you got to work really hard together in order to make what they want a reality, or if you want to make what you want a reality.
All right, Daniel, what about you?
I think the best part about working with other creators for their projects, and I have done it I've made a bunch of, channel intros. So that's always somewhat in part collaboration, because you get a little bit of what they want and what you want as your style as an editor. And it's always great that they either, if you're the sole editor of something, that they place full faith in you when you're working on something that they have their imprint on. And it's another thing when you're equally matched for the workload that the edit calls for. And I think my favorite part about that is just being able to meet in the middle and discover what works best for a project that you might have not seen before. Something like that would be, I remember when there was this 180-degree rule break in Under the Dark, and the camera kind of rotates around Harleen Quinzel and Joker. And the first time I showed Michael, he was like, I just got whiplashed. And that is a really harsh camera move. And so we kind of figured out a way to balance out the speed. And then I was able to incorporate that in the final edit. I think did you edit that on a phone?
I did some. So I kind of mentioned the fact that I love doing little like rough edits and stuff. I kind of went back and I took screen recordings of that footage and looked at, like, I've tried to manipulate the settings within my editing programs to try and demonstrate the effect that I think he could achieve with obviously much more higher grade editing software, to kind of just showcase my point. So I think you ended up achieving the final result using your program based on how I demonstrated it with my rough mock edit of it.
And another, I also refer to when Frankie's loading the briefcase with cash. I didn't shoot enough frames for that, and I didn't have enough time to do so. My trip was literally the next day, and I was really crunched for time. So I kind of looked around to see my other options, if I could slow the clip down and see how that would look, but it looked a little choppy. And then Michael suggested that I would ping pong the footage to make it look like he's taking a little bit longer.
I think originally I suggested ping ponging it, but because I couldn't do that with my means, I did a demonstration with just straight up repeating the motion, and it didn't look too jarring, but it obviously would look smoother by ping ponging it.
Right. So that's
that's the best part. It back and forth.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, that's what I think the best part is, being able to collaborate and share ideas to suit your vision in the best way possible, because it's going to be you're eventually going to get there. Might as well do it with the best people. The worst part is also attached to the best part. And in that collaboration, it requires all hands on deck. And when you're communicating through social media or text, or just through the means of visually trying to get your point across, even though you can't get your point across because it's a lot harder, it's easier said than done. That can be that could be a huge gap between getting closer to your vision and kind of deteriorating what ends up being seen, because you can't fully communicate what you want to the other person when it's overseas. And this isn't always going to be the case. I just found that to be a personal struggle. Like, if you're trying to work on something in a collaborative effort, it's best to be in the same room so you can kind of show someone how to do it, which is why most of the time editors and their directors are usually in the same booth. I
really think the best part about working with someone is being able to kind of just, you can kind of get out of your own head a little bit. And not only kind of carry, like, if you're the editor for someone else, you can kind of take the burden off of them and maybe showcase what your perspective is on a project. You can give insight that maybe they can't think of. And if someone else is editing for you, you can kind of compromise and bring new ideas to the table. And doing that will allow a sort of freshness to come in. You're not solely tunnel vision on what you think is the right idea. You kind of have a little bit of play and give and experimentation with whatever it is you're working on. So having that ability to just create with somebody else rather than just doing it all alone, the collaboration in and of itself can be really special. And you could come up with stuff that maybe you wouldn't have come up with alone. Maybe some of your best solutions are not within what you can think of on your own, but more so what others can provide for you, and vice versa. But the worst part is also not being able to communicate, not being able to establish that common ground, not being able to execute either person's vision to the fullest potential,
Are we talking about this from a perspective of an editor or a director directing an editor, or both of you are editors?
Both. It's literally both from a directing and editing perspective. Both of my answers can be seen as, because as a director, you're really focusing on trying to execute your brainchild. You're really trying to bring that to fruition. And as an editor, you know how to manipulate the software, the assets, in order to sort of bring together a result that might work. And sometimes you're in a position where it's like, I have to do this myself, but you might not know how. And it could be very tricky trying to find the right thing that everyone is looking for. And sometimes you might not get there. So it can be really exhausting. It can be really frustrating, especially if you can't communicate about what each other wants or expects from whatever you're doing or working on. It can be a bit of a challenge trying to put your minds together and see what will ultimately be for the best for all involved.
It would be nice to pull this collaboration off in the same room one day. It'll happen.
Yeah, it would be really groovy if you could just be in the same space. Like, it could be really exciting. Don't be discouraged if your edits don't resemble what you're hoping for. It's going to take a lot of time, and you will get better if you really fight through it. There's a lot of different things that are at play. There's a lot of different experiences that you might not even have. There are experiences that I don't even have yet as an editor in all of my experience. And I'm sure the same could be said for Daniel and Jaren. We're still trying to be the best versions of ourselves, and every project is a different beast. You might have different things expected of a project. Some projects might be more effects heavy, some might be less. It all depends on what it is you're working on, but don't lose hope.
And it was a joke I made earlier about every export having final edit, or final edit 1 or 2, but that's so real. You know, it might be a joke, but it happens to all of us. And the reason it happens is because not everything will turn out the way you expected it to be, and not everything should. Because if everything is, very by the book, and if everything is strict to the script, then, it might just turn out to be lacking a little bit of personality that you could have involved because of the very human experience that is strenuous editing. Speaking of jokes, I have been Project422 Films.
And I've been Stealthabotte. And we're Project Stealthabotte.
And I am Jaren.
Before we go, we're going to have a little bit of fun with a little bit of a game. We've been doing some of these in the more recent episodes. Right before that, again, we all have different social media handles. If you're watching this through YouTube, you could probably see all the different usernames that we have for our different platforms. So feel free to check out what we're working on. Feel free to check out the Animators Assembled social media, as well as the Discord. There's a lot of good stuff. And hopefully you'll stay tuned for what's in store. And hopefully you'll go back and revisit what we've already done. This is our 11th episode. We've already made 10 of these, and this is our 11th. So that's pretty exciting. And we still got a couple more left to do before we close out the podcast for now.
Season 1.
Assuming we get renewed and greenlit for season 2. We'll see. But yeah, so with all of that said and done, thank you all for tuning in. Now it's time for a game. We're going to play Would You Rather Editor Edition. So how this will work, each of us
Audience applause. Yeah.
You guys are so screwed now. So each of us has a would you rather question that we are going to present to the other two. And we're going to see who has the most daunting would you rather dilemma.
That one, yeah. I agree. That one.
Who would like to go first?
Well, I don't have a question still. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, that's Daniel, do you have one?
I do. I came prepared.
Take it away.
So, would you rather have your editing software crash constantly on a deadline? Oh, by the way, these aren't yin and yang, so there's no way these two are going to connect. It's not like, you get would you rather. So, would you rather have your editing software crash constantly on a deadline or not have video playback during workflow?
Oh, God. Damn, Jaren, go first.
No, you.
Oh, fuck. Okay, so no playback during the edit. Like, you can't see anything that you're editing. You just have to go with it.
Not playback. I'd say like it would stop. Like you can't it's not visible. It's, let's say it runs at 2 frames per second.
I get more anxiety over crashing because I don't know how much progress might have been lost or when the last time I saved. Adobe does have autosave. HitFilm has a great autosave. DaVinci doesn't have great autosave, but it does it has like a little indicator of when you really should save it again. But I'm used to glitchy playback. I'm kind of normal with that. I'm kind of good at editing with playback errors. So I'd rather have the playback errors than the constant worry about whether or not what I've worked on has saved and having to close out the software and reopen the software. I think that's a much bigger hassle than just not having decent playback, because I could always export it and then watch it back and be like, okay, maybe there's an issue here and I have to go to that particular spot based on that rough export of a scene. I can make do with glitchy playback. So that's my would you rather. Jaren, what about you?
I'm going to have to agree with Michael on this. I think I'd rather deal with a laggy viewport display rather than consistent crashing, because funny enough, I've dealt with both quite a bit in the past. And more or less, I've just learned to just adjust and just overcome and adapt with each problem, because there'd be days where my viewport display would just decide to be laggy with my FX and with everything going on. So it'd just be a bunch of slowness. And I'd be like, okay, are these audios syncing up to the head movements, the arm movements, yada, 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 or are they not? And then there'd be some days where it's just like, I'm simply trying to undo something and all of a sudden hit film has crashed. But yeah, I can't expand much beyond that because it's more or less kind of the same with me.
Daniel, do you have
Sounds
a preference?
great. I mean, this is I'm on the same page as Jaren. I've dealt with both and both suck. But if I were to pick one, I'd get rid of the crashing because typically with the software I use, I hardly ever get to retrieve stuff that crash. So I
have to work from scratch, or you have to work from the
Yeah.
last point you saved, and that's typically my experience too with it. So
or
I'd
it doesn't
rather
save, like in between, like you save and the spinning wheel keeps on spinning forever, and then it says not responding, and then you don't remember when the last time you
God.
saved was, so it gets stuck, and then you go back, and then you have to start from scratch. And sometimes it's a little bit of a blessing in disguise because the last time that happened to me, I was able to think of something to improve upon for that. But at the same time,
sometimes it gives you
it's
an
a-
opportunity, but it's always a pain in the
it's
ass.
a
Nonetheless,
pain in the dick. Yeah.
I got an interesting one. There's no software that's like this, but it's a very interesting question. Would you rather deal with editing with one layer of video or one layer of audio? I think it's obvious no answer that is, but like, for example, for me, I'd probably choose one layer of video because I'd be able to just export everything once I'm done with just the music and everything else, and then just put the VFX up. Oh, wait, no, you
Yeah,
wouldn't
that's
be
a
able to do
good one. I
VFX.
really like
That's
that.
such a
Able to.
difficult question.
I love it.
How would you
I
handle
think-
VFX if you can't add layers for video?
I'll go with the video. I'd rather work with one layer of video because, like I said earlier, I'm a junkie for sound design. So I want to have all that space for everything else. And video or visual effects can, suppose that you don't require a lot of visual effects and have everything practically. For a fight scene, you would need majority of that for sound design. And I'm just going to cross my fingers that color grading is implied.
I have a creative answer for this. I would rather have one layer of audio. If that one layer of audio can be voice recording, I could do live performance sound mixing through other means. I
Not
could
where I
have
thought
my
you were going
music,
with
my
this.
sound effects, I could have my voice acting. All of that stuff can be recorded live in a recording audio track. That way I have the layers for the visual effects and the text and the actual footage in and of itself, because it would be physically impossible to do all of that with one layer of visual footage. Unless if you had outside sources, you would have to find other ways to layer that footage, because you wouldn't be able to layer it if you only had one video footage layer. Whereas you could record audio in real time. With recording footage in real time, you can't do all the live effects that you can, unless if you're a weatherman and you got that kind of technology at your disposal. And even then, you might not be able to execute everything you need. And that still requires actual additional layering beyond something. But it would be much less of a headache to record audio performance of music, sound, and voice and performance vocally than it would be to try and layer visuals with one layer. So that's why I'm picking one layer of audio.
I thought your loophole was if this is a video editing software, you just work on the audio in another file and then use that one layer to your advantage after
I mean,
the fact.
technically speaking, you could do that too, but hypothetically, if you only have the one software to work with and there aren't any other options,
What
you
a
could
bleak
still do a
world.
live audio performance. Wow, ironic. I'm the one who disagreed and y'all were in agreement. Okay, so
Boomin.
would you rather edit a video solely based on how someone else describes it to you without seeing it or hearing it for yourself? Or would you rather edit a video without ever undoing any action you performed during the editing process?
No, screw that.
As in, you're not allowed to undo anything that you work on
first one.
yourself.
The former,
First one.
the former,
Oh, the first one.
100%.
Oh, the former, yeah.
Am I
Oh,
stupid?
man, I would hate to see what the result would be if I could not undo anything. Is deleting possible? That's the question. That's my question. Or
No.
Former.
You
the former.
choose the
my
former, or you're incorrect.
I mean, technically, undoing the action does not mean closing out of the project and starting from scratch.
I don't care.
Or starting a new project
So
where you can do it differently.
Throw something on, see it, and if I don't like it, I close out and reopen.
What a waste of time.
As in you'd have to repeat all of the edits that you've done prior to that point in a new project
Cringe.
before you made the screw up.
Cringe.
Hang on. Okay, describe by someone. Like, would
Someone
you say,
else, it's literally like Battleship.
Okay.
Okay? Someone has a pair of headphones
Yeah,
on.
that
you
one.
don't get to see the
100%
screen,
that one.
nothing. You just solely go off of what they say.
That one.
Are we all in agreement on it?
Oh, yeah.
Are we all smart? Yeah.
I guess we are. Woo.
Wow, that was fun, you guys.
Wow, guys, that was really, really fun.
I think that was a fun little game we got there.
Yeah, that was pretty fun.
And we officially surpassed the 2-hour mark in the recording, so that's also kind of fun.
Yeah, that was great, guys.
All right, before we threaten anybody, let's cut the check.